Greetings, Father Mark signing on, continuing the course on the history of Catholicism in the United States. This is my second attempt for the next installment of the 1840s. I'd made a video over an hour, and then my computer just informed me that it was an unsupported file format, even though every video I've uploaded so far has been from this computer using the same program. Yeah, so it was a whole hour that my life just poof, was gone. So anyway, it's the wheel of pain continues to roll over our throats. So continuing the 19th century, 1840s. 1844 was an election year, and that triggered the Second Bible War in American history, connected to the public education movement, which we have visited several times before. The forces of the 1844 Bible War were more organized, and the emotions more inflamed. So this is almost a decade after the first success of just a little over a decade after the first success of the public school movement in achieving, by voter consent, the creation of a state board of education in Massachusetts. And so now they wanted, like-minded people were trying to do the same thing. And their goal was all states, to do it in all states. But in 1844, there was Pennsylvania and New York. And it was presented, for reasons we've covered. It was the Catholic bishops were divided over this. There were bishops like the Philadelphia bishop, Francis Kenrick, who supported the public school movement. However, he wanted a well, not permission, but he wanted it codified in policy, I'll put it that way, that Catholic children in the public schools would be taught using the Douay-Rheims English translation of the Bible rather than the King James translation of the Bible, which was Protestant. Whereas other Catholic bishops, like John Hughes, or Dagger John as he was known, Bishop of New York, opposed the public education movement altogether, and he rather, because he saw it as a Trojan horse for just teaching non-denominational Protestantism at government expense to all children, including non-Protestants. So at first he opposed it altogether, but then realized that the Overton window was moving, so eventually it was going to happen. Then he switched and wanted the tax money paid by Catholics to be refunded so that they could use it for Catholic schools. All right. Bishop Kenrick, having a higher degree of trust in human goodness than Dagger John did, Bishop Kenrick published his proposals in the newspapers of the day because he thought they were completely reasonable, while Dagger John had made his arrangements behind closed doors with candidates that Carroll Hall would support. Carroll Hall, we met last time, was a combination. It was a place. Carroll Hall was just a place, a meeting hall. But it was also the name of a group that Bishop Hughes established. It was a combination lobbying group and political action committee. As a result of Bishop Kenrick's well-meaning openness, he became the focus for the predictable publicity attacks, the backlash. So the combination of so he was presented as attacking the King James Bible. So the combination of years, of generations of anti-Catholic polemics, combined with the emotion generated by the possibility of access to the public treasury. If it passed, a state board of education was passed, and tax theft was legislated to fund it, then that's an enormous number of people who are going to all of a sudden have employment, lifelong employment. And this also means, not just teachers, but somebody's got to build the schools, the school buildings. Somebody has to maintain them. Somebody has to print the textbooks. And that's all money, which would be funded by the Treasury. And the Treasury was replenished through tax theft. So all of those emotions synthesized into an eruption of 3 days of rioting in Philadelphia in May of 1844, which was just the beginning of another round of violent, homicidal anti-Catholicism in American history. In the 1830s, we saw an Ursuline convent in Massachusetts was incinerated, and no one was punished for that. And another episode here, we just have this is the next new decade, a new outbreak of homicidal anti-Catholicism. So the Philadelphia nativist riots of 1844, and remember, in this context, mid-19th century America, Native Americans, that term did not refer to Indians, to the American Indians. It was used by those who were multi-generational descendants of of what they regarded as the founders of the country, the English, the English Anglo-Saxon Protestant founders of the country. And their target, as we saw in the previous video with a quote from Orestes Brownson, their target of the moment was Irish Catholic immigrants. Okay, that did not just begin in the 1840s. Irish Catholics immigrated first to Philadelphia as early as the 1780s, seeking employment in the emerging textile industry. The establishment of Pennsylvania as a Quaker colony made it the second most hospitable destination for Catholic immigrants after Maryland. However, after the Napoleonic Wars ended, 1815, waves of immigration increased, particularly among young men in Europe who had been drafted into the armies of various nations, used as cannon fodder to service the ambitions of their kings and rulers. And once the wars were done, okay, we're done with you. So, they were just decommissioned, left with no employment, and at the time, no pensions. Now, there was no military pensions then, so that is, dumped. And so many of them, as they've been away from home for years, they were, they'd just been, the organic ties with their community were separated. Maybe the girls they'd wanted to marry had ended up marrying somebody else, or maybe they moved away. Maybe their villages were completely destroyed. And so, these guys, they didn't have much. They had no ties, and okay, America's over there, so we'll go give that a try. So waves and waves of immigrants came over. Now, the numerical majority of that wave, the post-Napoleonic wave of immigrants, the numerical majority were Protestants. However, there were many Catholics also that came. But the Protestants, the numerical majority, brought with them their multi-generational internalized fear and hatred of Catholicism, or popery, as they would say, which among some of these immigrants may have been compounded by ethnic hatred. Always, an effective tool in the hands of the demonic. For example, German Protestants had two vectors of hatred toward French Catholics. It was the ethnic hatred of German for French that had been going on since the Middle Ages, but also Protestant versus Catholic as the wars of religion of the 16th, 17th centuries. Analogously, Anglo-Protestants, meaning English Protestants, had two vectors of hatred for French and Irish Catholics. ethnically, the English had a multi-generational hatred, ethnic hatred, of the French and the Irish. But then they also had, as Protestants, they also had their multi-generational fear and hatred of popery. And England and France also had their wars of religion. As wherever Protestantism appeared, that's what happened. There were, as we covered in another playlist on the modern history course. The first identifiable ethno-religious homicide in Philadelphia occurred in 1828. The victim was an Irish Catholic immigrant. Now, this was not the first Irish person or the first Irish Catholic to be murdered, but 1828 it was, the record indicates it was just because he was an Irish Catholic that he was targeted, just as a random violence, just murdering the guy coming home from the grocery. And they who was punished for that? Zero. No one was punished for that. The absence of any legal repercussions for this crime fostered a defensive mentality among Irish Catholic immigrants. And they had grown up, of course, under the Anglo-Protestant military occupation of their home country, which had been going on since King James I in the 17th century, when he deliberately relocated Scottish Presbyterians from Scotland to Ireland and install them as a military aristocracy over the indigenous Irish Catholics. So one result of this in 1831 was an open street battle that occurred along 5th Street in Philadelphia, as local Protestants made a point of loud public celebration of the anniversary of the Battle of the Boyne River. It's Boyne. That's a battle that occurred in Ireland. It's a river in Ireland in 1690 between Catholics and Protestants, and the Protestants won. So, this is not only celebrating the Protestant victory, but also, like rubbing the nose of the Irish Catholics into the memory of their defeat. So that led to an open street battle. Let's see. The last atlas, the other atlas I had, it's so big that it was hard for me to see. So I have one. This may be easier at least to orient ourselves. Okay. So, all right. Yeah. Let's see. Up here. So there is Pennsylvania. It's not really that. See that? That's Pennsylvania. That's where this one is happening. And just to the north of it, where the other Bible war is going to happen, is New York. Right up here, New York. Mm-hmm. And then, for we are down here in New Orleans. This is New Orleans. Okay. It's not really a good picture. No, that's all right. That's enough. So the pejorative of the day, we're calling the Irish Catholics transports, as if they were just merchandise, just being transported over. This is a central background to understanding the particular way the Bible war manifested in Philadelphia in the 1840s. The Catholic bishop, Francis Kenrick, had made, and published opinion pieces in the newspapers making what he thought was very moderate proposals that Protestant children in public schools would use the King James Bible, and Catholic students in public schools would use the Douay Rheims translation of the Bible. So anti-Catholics, anti-popery types distorted this moderate suggestion into a false accusation, accusing Bishop Kenrick of wishing to eliminate the King James Bible from the schools altogether, which was not the case. But, it's a false accusation, and false accusations are always believed, especially when directed against the hierarchy or the clergy. In 1842, dozens of Protestant clergymen formed the American Protestant Association to defend America from popery, as they would say, and then also to promote the King James Bible. We covered that earlier. The following year, in 1843, a Protestant layman who by profession was a newspaper editor, his name was Louis Levin, Levin. He was the editor of a newspaper titled The Daily Sun, S-U-N, as the sun in the sky. And he used his editorials, to make attacks against Catholics in general, Catholic immigration in particular, and in this context of the Bible War, Bishop Kenrick specifically. He was also, in December of that year, 1843, he was a charter member of the American Republican Association. Now, that had nothing to do with the Republican Party, which didn't exist yet. It came into existence later in history, which we'll cover. So this American Republican, just in the sense of the general republic, like supporting, because the assertion was of the group that the republic as a form of government in the United States was under attack by the benighted tyranny of popery, threatening to overwhelm the godly United States through waves of enthralled Catholic serfs, ordered by their overlords in Europe to enter into the country masquerading as immigrants. And then once there were enough Catholics in the republic, then they would overthrow the republic, and turn the United States into another, medieval tyranny. So we saw this is the same kind of paranoia that happened in the 1830s that led to the burning of the Ursuline convent in Massachusetts. In Philadelphia, the next episode of urban violence occurred in 1844 in a suburb of Philadelphia called Kensington. It's a place where many Irish Catholic immigrants lived. It was essentially a ghetto, Irish Catholic ghetto. In February of that year, 1844, a Catholic school teacher who lived in Kensington, his name was Hugh Clark, he proposed suspending Bible reading in school until the school board could devise a policy acceptable to both Catholics and Protestants, in which he suggested that Bishop Kenrick's suggestion would be the ideal. Protestants use the King James Bible, Catholics use the Douay Rheims. The reaction to this was explosive, literally, violently explosive, which can only be understood as a synthesis of pre-existing ethnic hatred with religious rage. And as we see, ethnic hatred has always been such a powerful tool of the demonic in dividing us. Humans, not just in the United States, but just dividing humans throughout history. So this combination of ethnic hatred, religious rage, paranoia, was described at the time as nativism, meaning a movement which self-identified as a movement of defense among those born in the United States, adherents of one of the versions of Protestantism. Defense against the threat of large-scale immigration of Catholics to the country. So from their perspective, the nativist perspective, Protestants of English ancestry created the Republic, making the Republic, the United States, the inherited legacy of Anglo-Protestant descendants, which was them, of the descendants of the founders. So they regard it as like, it's our property, it's our heritage, it's our legacy. Our ancestors created it, and they bequeathed it to us. Therefore, they regarded themselves as the only portion of the population fitted by justice and legitimacy to decide policy with regard to all public affairs, including immigration, including who should be allowed in the country. So seen in those terms, non-Anglo, meaning non-English descendants, and non-Protestant immigrants were guilty of breathtaking arrogance in making any demands for any changes at all. So from the nativist perspective, immigrants who were allowed into the country that were non-Anglo and non-Protestant should have a posture exclusively of humble gratitude for just being allowed to exist in the Republic. Yet, from the nativist perspective, such immigrants were insisting on changes to the Republic, to the way things were done in the Republic, which they did not have a right to do, because they were just visitors. That they don't. It's not their property, so to speak. It's not their inheritance, from the nativist perspective. And in this case, the change that we're demanding was a change to the usage of the King James Bible, which the nativists regarded as one of the foundations of the Republic, of American public life. So therefore, the conflict in the Second Bible War became, in the minds of many nativists, an existential battle for the existence of the Republic. Now, it should be noted that while ethnic hatred was certainly involved in this, hatred of the Irish and French Catholics, that the antipathy in this case was not dermophobia, which is a hatred of skin color. Now that dermophobia is a particular type of ethnic hatred that did characterize later conflicts with regard to immigration. Yet in this mid-19th century, Catholic immigrants to Philadelphia were consisted of Irish Catholics, Scottish Catholics, French Catholics, even some German Catholics. Southern Germany was still Catholic. All of which had the same dermis, the same white skin as the Anglos, as the English descendants. So dermophobia was not the particular form of ethnic hatred. Rather, in this case, it was the cultural version of ethnic hatred, and the religious version of ethnic hatred that motivated the violence. So, with that background, on May 3rd, 1844, nativists of this sort had a rally, a protest in Independence Square in Philadelphia. They were protesting both Catholic immigration in general, as well as the specific issue of the day, the election year, was what they interpreted as Catholic opposition to the King James translation of the Bible being used in public schools. So the whole thing was based on a lie. The Catholics, Bishop Kenrick was not proposing the removal of the King James version of the Bible, just that the Protestant children be taught with that and the douay reams for that. But truth doesn't matter. False accusations are always believed. Now, this assembly on May 3rd turned out to be a legitimate exercise of free speech. They got together, they screamed for a few hours, then went home, which, of course, the Constitution gives them a right to do. However, it stoked emotions. As you remember, this is an election year. So this is all, the groups are supporting different candidates for office. And all the candidates had to, this was the issue, so candidates had to declare where they stood. Do you as a candidate support the public school movement in the state or not? And are you Catholic or Protestant? So that's how it became. That's why it continued like this. So 3 days later, May 6th, another group assembled of nativists assembled for a rally. This time, not in Independence Square, which was a conventional place for people to have such protests, but this time they went to the Irish Catholic immigrant neighborhood of Kensington to protest Irish Catholic immigration. So they go into in front of the houses. Well, they weren't really houses; they were these large, these tenements. But anyway, going to where they live, where the Irish Catholic immigrants live, to protest that Irish Catholic immigrants were there. So, in other words, the May 3rd protest in Independence Square was just a general political statement, exercise of free speech, but it got everybody angry, and they wanted to do something. And so 3 days later, May 6th, they went to the homes of these Irish Catholic immigrants. So, in other words, they went there looking for a fight. And that's what they got. Inevitably, the protest escalated into violence. The violence became a riot, in the course of which 4 people died in the fighting. The next day, May 7th, the anti-papists, the anti-Catholics, then summoned all Americans to defend themselves from the bloody hand of the Pope. So here's another way that this happens. So this nativist anti-Catholic mob goes to the neighborhood where Irish immigrants, Catholic immigrants were living, to protest that they were there. Violence occurs, and who gets blamed? The victims, the Irish Catholic immigrants. They're blamed for the riot. It was their homes. I mean, they hadn't gone anywhere looking for a fight. These are people who came to protest their existence. Of course, a fight occurred, so they get blamed for it. And the publicity machine, the newspapers, a numerical majority were owned by Protestants. So that's the story that kept getting repeated and reported all over the country. You see these Irish Catholics, they're benighted, they're ignorant, they're violent. They're disrupting public order. We can't allow any more in, because then this is just going to keep happening. And you see, that is what the Pope is sending them there for this, to destabilize and eventually overthrow the Republic. So just a tissue of lies, but people want to believe. They do. So another mob on May 7th, next day, another mob marched to Kensington, to the homes where the Irish Catholic immigrants were living, and this time gunfire was exchanged. Another riot, which became an urban battle. And during this, the nativist mob started the arson. They engaged in arson. They set fire to the fire station. Ironically, they set fire to 30 homes and the market, the public market, which functioned as a grocery. And so that where they went to shop, buy their food, more innocent people died. Municipal. So where the police? All right. So this is, of course, on church history. So the history of law enforcement in the United States is also a very long story. When the nation was established, everybody didn't have a police force in the way that we think of it. And the whole idea of the, even in England where it started, Scotland Yard, that was just started in the 19th century. And so when municipal police forces, law enforcement, were created, the issue, of course, was the tax theft to pay for it. But when they were, they were originally to protect property. Like watchmen, to protect property. So initially they were not early American or mid-19th century American law enforcement typically did not have a bureau of detectives, that would go out and investigate crimes. Municipalities like Philadelphia, which could afford it, that did have law enforcement, municipal law enforcement, they were to protect property, because they were paid for by property owners. It was funded by tax theft on properties and businesses. So, municipal law enforcement in Philadelphia was overwhelmed. And they had to get involved now because arson was, because the defensive property was, at the time, was their primary duty. The sheriff was a guy named Morton, Morton, McMichael. Of Scottish ancestry, Protestant. Presbyterian. He requested help from the Pennsylvania militia, and that's the state military. So the militia, state militias, are the what are now the National Guards, of each state. So it's a state military. So he requested help from the Brigadier General George Cadwalader of the state militia, also Protestant, though he was Anglo, he was English descent. And they did. The 1st Brigade of the Pennsylvania Militia came. They established fixed positions at major intersections in the city to try to interrupt the movement of large-scale rioting. And that's the militias. That was the National Guards. So they were not there to protect property. They were there to stop people from killing each other. And so the next day, May 8th, the rioting continued. The nativists continued. They incinerated the home of Clark, of the guy who made the proposal, the Catholic, Irish Catholic, who was proposed that the schools suspend reading of the Bible until the school board could come up with a compromise. So that they found out where he lived and they burned his house down. There was a Catholic school on 5th Street, which was burned down. A convent of the Sisters of Charity was burned down. 2 Catholic churches were burned down, St. Michael's on 2nd Street and St. Augustine's on 4th Street. So the mayor, Pennsylvania had a mayor. His name was John Morin Scott, also Protestant. But he believed in public order. He was a, sane, rational person. And he appeared in public and he was pleading for calm, but he was pelted with stones and garbage for his trouble. During the riots on May 8th, 14 were killed and 50 were injured, and 200 homes were destroyed by a combination just of vandalism and arson. Now, at that point, then the National Guard left their fixed positions and just started marching in the streets and just rounding up everybody. And they set up improvised camps, multiple camps to separate everybody, and let everybody stay there overnight. Did not give them food and water. So, that drained their energy until everybody calmed down. And then that's it. Once everybody calmed down, they let them go home. As the immense prison, the American prison system, didn't exist the way it does today. I mean, it just didn't have the capacity to cage 2.5 million people for decades like we do now. So after everyone calmed down, after a full night and a day with no food and water, then they were allowed to go home. All right, so time passed. The next month, on July 2 months later, July 3rd, the day before Independence Day, Father John Patrick Dunn, Irish immigrant, he was serving at St. Philip Neri Church on Queen Street, and that was Southwark, which was south of the city. He received a warning that his church might be attacked during the Independence Day parade the next day, July 4th. It's in Philadelphia. Of course, they're going to celebrate Independence Day. So he was warned that there was some nativist who were going to use that as a cover to do it again, to repeat the May episodes. Now, given what happened in May, he tried to take preventative action. He applied to the governor of Pennsylvania, was also Protestant, David R. Porter, instead of just asking for a brigade of the militia to come to defend the church, he requested from the governor authorization to form a new militia company, a volunteer militia company that would protect the church. The governor agreed. even though he was not Catholic, he didn't like the rioting. I mean, just for the sake of public order. So he thought, the priest thought, and the governor agreed that this would be a deterrent. That if a mob, if they see, if they saw that a target location was defended, then they would lose their enthusiasm, and that was the thinking anyway, that it would be a deterrent. So the governor not only approved the formation of the company, but he authorized disbursement of 25 muskets from the state arsenal, the Frankfurt Arsenal. And the governor ordered Major General Robert Patterson of the Pennsylvania militia to put his militia troops on alert, just in case a backup was needed. As it happened, the July 4th Independence Day parade was a legitimate exercise of, the right of free assembly. There was no violence. But the next day, July 5th, the nativist and anti-Catholic, anti-papist mob assembled in front of the church, St. Philip Neri Church. They heard or saw, it wasn't a secret, weapons being brought into the church from the arsenal. And so this mob, they had been led to, who were demagogues that were stirring this up. They said, oh, you see, the Catholics are arming themselves, and they're going to take over the city. So the mob appeared in front of the church and demanded that the weapons be surrendered. So the sheriff comes, and the mob says, okay, you go in and take the weapons. Now, though this militia, this volunteer company, was duly authorized by the governor, and he had authorized weapons, at least 25 muskets, for the company, the sheriff, Morton McMichael, along with 2 city aldermen, city council members, entered the church to speak to Father Dunn. Now, they were seeking to neutralize the situation without violence. So the sheriff chose appeasement, and he persuaded or intimidated, whatever. The details of the conversation have not been preserved, but we do know what happened. So a lot of this has to be inferred. However, he did it. The sheriff convinced Father Dunn to surrender a dozen muskets, thinking that if the mob demanded that and the sheriff came out with a dozen muskets, then they would be appeased and go home. So the priest agreed, and the muskets were brought out. The crowd saw that, and then the sheriff said, "Okay, you got what you wanted, so go home." That's not what happened. The mob remained, making more demands. So that's what happens. You appease, and nevertheless, continuing the appeasement, the sheriff and the alderman, this time with 17 protesters, entered the church, because the mob said, "Well, no, they had more than a dozen muskets," and they searched the church, and they discovered 53 muskets, 10 pistols, and a keg of gunpowder, and a case of ammunition. So they had more weapons than those that were given to them by the governor from the arsenal. But given what happened in May, it's not surprising that they would feel a need to defend themselves, to arm themselves for defense. Well, then, the mob took this as, you see, we were right. You see, they're assembling all this even more weapons than the governor had authorized, more than the sheriff knew about, so they really are planning to take over the city. So to avoid inciting a mob, the sheriff had the search party, the mob representatives, stay in church, while he sent a message to the militia, the regular state militia, asking for reinforcements. Time passed. Just after midnight on July 6th, General Patterson of the state militia arrived with a company of troops to clear the streets. After the crowd dispersed, the Catholics in the church not the rioters. The Catholics in the church were disarmed. So once again, just like the Kensington riots, the rioters go to where the Irish lived, to pick a fight, and then the Irish get blamed for it. So here, and again, the Irish Catholics were armed to defend themselves. Their church, the rioters go to the Catholic church, threaten them, yet the Catholics are blamed for it, and the Catholics are the ones that have to surrender their weapons. Okay, time passed. The same day, after lunch, the crowds returned to menace the church. Now, the senior overall commander of the militia, George Cadwalader, by this time he was on the scene, and he ordered the crowds to disperse. He said, you got what you wanted. The church has been searched. There are no weapons. So even if you're right, and they did want to take over the city, well, they don't have the weapons now. But the crowd was not appeased. So they milled around, more screaming and doing what protesters do for hours until the evening. And the sheriff, you remember his job, law enforcement at the time, is property protection. So he had formed, in the meantime, a 150-member posse. And he arrived the evening. And then, sort of throughout the evening, the military presence grew. And the militia, the regular militia, brought 3 cannons and stationed them on the streets. The soldiers then cleared the streets near the church. They were pelted with rocks by the mob, but they held, so at this point they maintained discipline. But General Cadwalader thought, okay, this has to stop. We can't let them get away with this. So he was going to order a volley from the cannon fired into the crowd to teach them a lesson that you can't throw rocks at the militia. There was a former congressman, U.S. congressman from Philadelphia. His name was Charles Naylor, Naylor. He went to the general and begged him not to open fire. And the general arrested him for that. And now, okay, here it is. So the general arrested him, and instead of just sending him to the barracks or to the mayor's house or whatever, because there are really no jails at this point, because the law enforcement just defends property. They don't. So the general arrested the congressman and had him held inside the church. Now, so the mob sees this. They regard this as the Catholics arresting a Protestant politician who was speaking up to defend the true Americans, the nativists. Even though the General Cadwalader who did it was not Catholic, and he did not arrest Naylor, for any religious reasons, because he was pro-Catholic, because Cadwalader decided to punish the mob and for throwing rocks at the troops, regardless of their religion. Cadwalader didn't care, whatever religion they were. You throw rocks at our troops, you have to be punished. People have to know there's an immediate consequence for that. So that's why he did it. But putting him in the church is the mob, thought, okay, this is the Catholics doing. So overnight, the crowds and the soldiers dispersed. But the next day, they were right back at it, July 7th. So a crowd, another mob, led by an alderman, one of the city council members, and the sheriff returned. They demanded Naylor's release. So the general had kept Naylor confined in the church overnight. So discussions continued. The crowd size grew, and a cannon was brought back from a nearby wharf, but this time it was pointed at the church. Naylor, the congressman, and another who was arrested with him were at this point released and carried home on the shoulders of the mob, cheered, we won. And then the mob attacked the church. You see how this goes? The mob attacked the church. The cannon was used, and so they fired a cannon at the church, obviously punctured the wall. Then a second cannon appears, was brought from the wharf, and opened fire. The mob then started, pelting the building with rocks, and then they broke in through a side door and started vandalizing the interior. So the soldiers return, the militia returns, and they open fire on the mob. And then the mob retreated temporarily. After withdrawing some space from the church, the leaders of the nativist mob started negotiating with the militia, and the militia agreed to withdraw. And the militia agreed they would withdraw and accepted the word of these nativist leaders that they would guard the church. They said, okay, we made our point, so we're not going to do any more. As the militia withdrew, the mob once again pelted the soldiers with rocks. But this time, now whether it was the same soldiers or whatever, whether they were just tired or, but this time they did not hold discipline. Without orders from their officers, they spontaneously opened fire with their muskets. Say, okay, you're throwing rocks at us? Well, okay, then. Now that only incited the mob further. So then the mob, now again, the church gets blamed for this because the militia, they're in front of the church when they open fire. Now, even though it had nothing, they didn't fire because of the church or because the priest told them to or anything like that. It's because they were getting rocks thrown at them. But they were standing in front of the church when they opened fire on the mob, so therefore, oh yeah, you see, this is the church. That they're doing this for the church. So then the mob stormed. They stampeded, forced their way into the church, caused more extensive damage to the interior, although by this point it was already just a husk that had 2 cannonballs, through the walls. So an hour of this where they vandalized the church, and then they left. They dissipated their energy, and then they left. By evening, a large number of other soldiers who had not been involved, and militia soldiers, arrived in the city to clear the streets. Once again, they were stoned by people. This time people in houses and on the rooftops. It just was stoning them. One of the officers was hit with a stone, and again, then he just ordered the men fire. So they opened fire on the mob again. This resulted immediately 7 died from the first volley. Then more people arrived with muskets and cannon, but these were not militia. These were people, who maybe stole a cannon, or maybe they took it off of a ship in the whatever. People with muskets and cannon appeared to oppose the militia. Now, these weren't Catholics. Neither group had a majority of Catholics involved. The priest certainly wasn't involved, and the bishop wasn't involved because he ran away. He was in New York. He had left Philadelphia and went to New York. Nevertheless, because it happens in front of the church, the Catholics get blamed for it, and that's how the national media reported it. So a full-scale, and this is just a full-scale battle, an urban war with muskets and cannons on both sides, soldiers against the mob. The battle lasted for several hours. The soldiers were fired upon, and they returned fire. So this is a straight up battle, a civil war on a city scale. So the soldiers had towed two cannon of their own, opened fire on the mob. The mob returned fire using their cannon, and as the volleys continued, and the mob ran out of shot, of the metal balls that the cannons fired. They stuffed nails and chains and knives in the cannon to fire grape shot. So now the battle became who's gonna capture all the cannons. Soldiers tried to charge on horseback to charge the mob's cannon position, but they got knocked off their horse as some people in the mob had tied a rope, at ankle level across the street, and it wasn't immediately visible to guys charging on horseback, so that the horses, were hobbled. They lost their balance and threw the cavalry riders off their horse. Eventually, though, the militia did capture the cannon by the early morning of July 8th. Then the fighting subsided again. In that fighting, another 15 people were killed, and another 50 to 100 were injured. So the governor now it's anarchy. Now, I mean, so public order has completely collapsed. So now the governor orders, well, maybe not the entire state militia, but it certainly orders many, many more troops. Ended up being 5,000 militia troops were ordered into Philadelphia, essentially invading the city. And he didn't formally declare martial law, because the way the law was, that's a term that essentially it was martial law. De facto was martial law. And then no further violence took place. And they stayed, for a week, and then started, once it looked like, okay, that everybody's finally over this, then the troops left the city. As with the May riots, there was a grand jury about this, because they couldn't very well ignore this. A grand jury was held and blamed the Irish Catholics for the riots. See, because an Irish Catholic church was attacked, therefore it's the fault of the Irish Catholics that this happened. See, and that story gets picked up and reported by all the national newspapers, distilled to a few sound bites, and the nativists say, "You see, we're right. These Irish, they're ignorant, illiterate peasants. They come over here, they're masquerading as immigrants seeking a new life, but they're really sent here on orders of the Pope to destabilize the country and take over." And so this is an election year, so that when the elections were held, and in Pennsylvania it was October when the votes were held, it was the largest voter turnout up to that point in Pennsylvania history, and nativist candidates swept into office. Bishop Kenrick, as I said, the Bishop of Philadelphia, fled the city. He disguised himself, fled the city. He went to New York, where he stayed with Dagger John. It's Bishop John Hughes of New York. So it's a national election year too, so the presidential election. And in New York, there were nativists that were doing the same thing, supporting candidates both locally and nationally. And so they were going to have rallies, political rallies, which of course, that is a legitimate exercise of the freedom of assembly and speech. However, the Philadelphia example shows that those with malignant intent could, and in the case of Philadelphia did, use such legitimate exercise of free speech and assembly as a cover for mob violence. So Bishop Hughes, Dagger John, Bishop of Philadelphia, Bishop of New York, made an appointment to see the mayor of New York. This was the 65th mayor of New York, Robert Morris. In the meeting, he informed the mayor, he said, "Look, we all know what happened in Philadelphia, so I just want to apprise you of a few precautions that we've taken. I have 7,000 Irish Catholic men in New York. We are armed, and we will be guarding all Catholic churches, convents, schools. If in the course of any rallies or protests or anything, if a single window of any of our buildings is broken, we're going to burn the city down." Now the mayor knew that Dagger John was not the type to make an idle threat, so he canceled public political rallies until after the election, meaning he did not issue a permit, for them to meet. And this is when Bishop Hughes got the nickname Dagger John. An article, a congregation, a Protestant minister named David Hale, wrote an opinion piece in the newspaper, and and people knew, because when Bishop Hughes was one who published many articles in the newspaper also, and when he signed his name, and it was put in typescript, it was retained. They would have a cross, John, comma, Bishop of New York. So instead of the cross, John, then this David Hale said, well, it's not a cross, it's a dagger, so Dagger John. So what happened with the election? Well, in New York and Pennsylvania, the public school supporters, candidates, were elected, and meaning, and also those who would vote for the tax theft to support a public school system. Attendance at these schools were not yet mandatory. That would be a fight for later, after the Civil War, because it's incremental. But they got, this is how the movement was achieving its objective incrementally. First, get a state board of education. That's the Overton window. When something's first brought up, oh, no, this is crazy. No, we can't do this. Well, then the next time it's brought up, well, okay, I heard that before. Still don't like it, but, it's not crazy. Then okay, the next time it's brought up, okay, well, we got to take this seriously and, think about this. And then, the next time, well, then it went. And so that's the Overton window. It's a well-documented phenomenon, public manipulation. How it just keeps something that initially appears to be completely outlandish and crazy and unthinkable, then eventually ends up getting done. So that's what happened. The bitterness of these Bible wars, as well as the anti-Catholic publicity and the false accusations, the slanders, the misrepresentations, that shaped Catholic-Protestant relations in the United States for generations to come. We're going to meet Bishop Kenrick as well as Bishop Hughes again. Bishop Kenrick later became Archbishop of Philadelphia, and Bishop Hughes, he stayed in New York the rest of his life, but in 1850 New York became an archdiocese, so he became Archbishop. So we will meet both of them again. Okay, so that Bible War, Second Bible War, New York and Philadelphia, 1844. The next year, 1845. Okay, so Satan won with that. He got people to kill each other over the Bible, fighting over the Bible. So what could delight Satan more than that? Not only getting people to murder each other, give into hatred of all variations, but to do it over the Bible. That's just a complete victory for Satan. But the Holy Spirit does not sleep. So the next year, 1845, a charitable organization for laymen was established in the United States. This is the Society of St. Vincent de Paul. Now, it had a longer history. It was founded in Europe. So it was established initially in Paris, France, on April 23rd, 1833, by Frederick Ozanam. It's Ozanam. He lived from 1813 to 1853. A layman, a devout Catholic, devout practicing Catholic, made his living as a professor of literature at the Sorbonne. But in his, outside of teaching, he was very active in the church. So establishing this society provided a structured means for people like him, Catholic laity who wanted to, be involved, a structured means for them to participate in the corporal works of mercy under the hierarchy, in cooperation with the bishop. It came to the United States through the activity of a Pennsylvania-born Vincentian, whom we've already met, John Timon, Timon, lived from 1797 to 1867. We met him earlier in 1835, as he was the appointed first provincial of the Vincentian order in the United States, based at Missouri. At the time, and then simultaneously, because as seminarians remember the tree of pain, that once you're ordained, it's not like, okay, you have one job, then another job comes up, and the second job replaces the first job. No. You have one job. If you do that well, your punishment is another job. Now, you still keep the first job, but you also have the second job. And if you do both of those jobs well, you have to be punished, and that requires even more punishment. So then you get a third job. But the other two don't go away. So just continue. So that's the tree of pain. That's how it grows. The tree of pain is watered with tears and sweat, as you will learn. So while remaining provincial of the Vincentians, he was appointed prefect apostolic of the Republic of Texas on July 18th, 1840. which, as we covered previously, had seceded from Mexico. Mexico didn't recognize the secession, but de facto, Texas had declared its independence, and it was a functioning republic. After the ecclesiastical care of Texas was transferred to Bishop Odine, Tiemann remained Vincentian provincial until he got another job. He was made founding bishop of the Diocese of Buffalo, New York, in 1847. But anyway, Tiemann is the one who he traveled back and forth to France, as many of the guys we met have, to raise money, frankly, but also to try to get recruits, recruit them for missionary work. So he was aware. He met Frederick Ozanam. He was aware of the success of the St. Vincent de Paul Society, and he was looking for something like that. In areas where the church was doing well, there were people like Ozanam. They were laymen. They were not going to become priests. Many had already had families, but they still wanted to do. They wanted to do something to work for the church. Something apart from devotions and the Mass, something in addition to that, and it worked. It had a record of success in France, so Tiemann brought it to the United States. But the whole Ozanam's idea, is to keep everything in line with the hierarchy, with the bishops, to proper structure. So Tiemann brought the idea to the Bishop of St. Louis, Missouri, Bishop Peter Kenrick, who was the younger brother of Bishop Francis Kenrick in Philadelphia. And he liked the idea, so he endorsed it. He promoted it. And Kenrick appointed one of his priests, a French immigrant priest, named Father Ambrose Heim, Heim. He was Alsatian. And so he was serving at the cathedral in St. Louis, which is the old cathedral, not the current one. And so he got an additional job. You see, he's still rector of the cathedral, so you don't lose that job. But you get another job in addition to that, where you're going to be the first spiritual director of the society. In this way, the first chapter of the Society of St. Vincent de Paul was chartered at the old cathedral in St. Louis. Now, clergy do not hold office. It's a society for laymen, but the chapters are chartered with the permission of the bishop, and they have a priest who's a spiritual director. So Father Ambrose was the first spiritual director, but the first president was a layman, Moses Linton, Linton. He was a convert from Protestantism, and he was Jewish, a convert from Judaism, and he was a physician by trade. And at the time, he took this on. He was later, he had given up private practice and was a professor of medicine at St. Louis University. And the St. Vincent de Paul Society is still with us. Last time I looked it up, which was a few years ago, it had 800,000 members in 140 countries. Of those, 97,000 were in the United States in 4,000 chapters. Now that, I looked that up maybe 5 years ago, but, it's probably still close. Okay, so the year of the Pennsylvania riots, 1844, was also a presidential election year, which provides us the occasion to meet President number 11, James Knox Polk, Polk, and his vice president, George M. Dallas. Let me see how long this video is. Oh, yeah, okay. This is a good place to stop, because if the videos are too long, they take too long to upload. So we'll pause here, pick up with President Polk next time. Thank you for your attention. This session is adjourned.